Good morning. Welcome to the Memorial Day service, the Unitarian Society of New Haven. As usual on this weekend, we have a rather smaller attendance than usual, which is too bad because we're having very good music today. And I hope that not only are people watching remotely, but that more will when they hear about how good the music was. My name is Gregory Feely. I and Gwen Severance will be your worship associates for today. I have some announcements to begin with. This year's final Sundays at 4 concert is next Sunday, June 4th at 4 p.m. A wonderful program will be sung by our Director of Music, Christopher Grundy, who will be accompanied by our Assistant Director of Music, Bill Braun. A reception will follow and free will donations will be accepted. If you believe in free will, as most Unitarians do, I don't, then please exercise it and donate generously. We hope you'll join us next Sunday. Speaking of fun events, come for another fabulous party at USNH, the Goods and Services Auction on Friday, June 2nd. Next week will be hopping. Enjoy entertainment, dinner and dessert, and silent and live auctions of more than 60 experiences, services, and items. Admission is by suggested donation. So suggest that you truck out your free will, and everyone is welcome. Dinner will be served. There will be a vegan option. I'm bringing that. We need volunteers, so if you're willing, please come sign up in the social hall. There really is something for everyone, and this is a family-friendly event. Childcare is available upon request. If you wish to come, you would contact Jamie and ask to make sure the childcare is there. And the announcement ends on the words, bid boldly. My last announcement is that the memorial service for David Schaefer, longtime member who was head of the Humanist Society here, will also be next weekend, Saturday, June 3rd at 11 a.m. And I hope that most of you can make it.
Our call to worship this morning is the poem Heavy by Mary Oliver. That time I thought I could not go any closer to grief without dying, I went closer, and I did not die. Surely God had his hand in this, as well as friends. Still I was bent, and my laughter, as the poet said, was nowhere to be found. Then said my friend Daniel, brave even among lions, it's not the weight you carry, but how you carry it. And now, as Greg lights the chalice, let us say together the words by Albert Thielander as found in your order of service. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. Come, let us worship together as we remember and as we sing hymn number 192, Nay, Do Not Grieve. The words are printed in your order of service. Jackie's going to lead us.
This is the part of the service when we recognize the joys and sorrows that our members have experienced over the past week. I would like to begin by noting that longtime member Bill Goward will be celebrating his 96th birthday on May 31st. And we will be celebrating the event with a cake next Sunday. So please. And let me assure you that the Sunday morning team, of which I am a member, if any of you are still here when you turn 96, we'll have a cake for you too. We have one joy. Patrick Korth is thrilled to announce that his daughter Nikki gave birth to her son Kiernan on May 19th. Because this is a Memorial Day service, when we remember those Americans who died in the course of serving in our military, I would like to invite members who lost a loved one in the armed services to stand up if they wish and identify their loved one. Jamie will come over to you with the microphone.
I lost my Uncle George, who was my mother's younger brother, and her older brother, Charles, Uncle Charles, was a great inspiration. So I'm very sad that I didn't get two uncles from my mother, but just got to know one. He died in the war.
I had a friend, David Rodman, who was a pilot in Vietnam. I had a cousin, Steve Carvel, who served in Vietnam, 3 tours of duty. He didn't die there, but he had mental health issues and crisis and just died 2 years ago.
Thank you. If my partner Steve Evans were here, he would want us to say that, to know that his dad served in World War II and was captured and escaped from a escaped from a camp of, for POWs, and he made it out alive, but he served.
My sister's husband was in the Second World War in the Battle of the Bulge, and my uncle was a Seabee, and he was in the other part, and they didn't die there, but they suffered because of where they were.
All the way back, all the way back.
Coming in on the live stream from Rich Stockton, he remembers his grandfather, Konstantin Stocky, who was gassed in the First World War and died in 1952 when I was 1. I never got to know him. He could have lived another 20 years.
Thank you, Jamie.
This is a poem by a Ukrainian poet Irina Shevlova. The title is A Poet Can't Write About War. A poet can't write about war, neither victim nor participant, nor defender, nor observer, nor outsider. So who? The war gave everyone a role. What's yours? Covering your mouth with your palm? Right, Miss Can't Hold Back the Tongue. Suddenly she's quiet, just when it seemed precisely the time to talk. But what can you say when over there, everyone everywhere is shouting, sirens screaming, smoke crackling high up, evacuum luggage wheels squeaking, crooked mouths of shattered windows desperately howling? She texts you, I can hear explosions close by, fighter jets flying. And you don't know how to respond.
A poem by Emily Dickinson. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long, or did it just begin? I could not tell the date of mine, it feels so old a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live, and if they have to try. And whether, could they choose between, it would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile, an imitation of a light that has so little oil. I wonder if, when years have piled some thousands on the harm that hurt them early, such a lapse could give them any balm. Or will they go on aching still through centuries of nerve, enlightened to a larger pain in contrast with the love? The grieved are many, I am told. There is the various cause. Death is but one and comes but once and only nails the eyes. There's grief of want and grief of cold, a sort they call despair. There's banishment from native eyes in sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary. to note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own.
Every week, we lift up the spiritual value of generosity by taking an offering for the ministries of this congregation. Those here in person may make donations on their way out of the sanctuary at the end of the service, or you may use the QR code printed in the order of service to make a donation. For those of you watching online while the music plays, I urge you to consider navigating to the usnh.org website and making a donation. Donations can also be sent by U.S. mail to the Unitarian Society of New Haven, 700 Hartford Turnpike, Hamden, Connecticut, 06517. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Tomorrow is Memorial Day, the day when Americans commemorate the United States military personnel who died in one of our many wars. Yesterday was the 100th birthday of Henry Kissinger, one of the enablers of the Vietnam War, which left 60,000 Americans dead, plus 2 or 3 million Vietnamese. We occupy today a rather grim sweet spot between memorializing our war dead and recalling those who brought about their deaths. The observance of Memorial Day dates from the first years after the Civil War, when it was originally called Decoration Day, named after the then popular practice of decorating the graves of the dead with flowers. In the aftermath of World War I, Memorial Day came also to commemorate the dead of that war, something that other countries observe on November 11th. After World War II, it became an observance for all military personnel killed in our country's wars. Mourning war dead is a special kind of mourning, for the dead are likelier to be young, siblings, sons and daughters, rather than parents. As sorrowful as it is to lose one's parents, one expects someday to do so. And when one grows older, one realizes that to lose one's parents is in fact the merciful thing, for the only alternative is for your parents to lose their child. As any parent can tell you, the possibility that you may outlive one of your children is a terror that never goes away. Most parents, when asked about it, will tell you that they doubt they would ever recover from such a loss. Yet, such losses have been common throughout human history. Infant mortality was high until less than 100 years ago, and married couples, whose birth rates were much higher than today's, could expect at some point to lose a child, perhaps several. Charles Darwin lost a daughter, a particular favorite, and eventually recovered from his grief. Then he lost a second daughter, from which he never recovered. His wife, Emma, though she did not record her experience, seems to have been similarly afflicted. And while deaths from wars, both civilian and military, remain high in many places of the world, that is much less true in the United States, where, though we retain our taste for overseas military engagements, we have learned to wage high-tech wars conducted from afar that minimize our own casualties. So while we set aside today to mourn our war dead, their numbers are nothing like they were in the generations past. Still, despite occasional attempts by more hawkish politicians to turn this day into a celebration of our military, or a day expressing thanks or support for them, we understand Memorial Day to be a day of mourning, which is to say, a day when we recognize grief. Whatever scientific advances we have made to reduce the deaths of children and young men, grieving is always with us. Not simply the disappointments and acute but short-lived miseries that are part of anyone's life, but the disabling, life-robbing condition called grief, a stopping dead that leaves those whom it afflicts unable to see any way out. What are we to make of such emotional devastation, which will eventually fall like an avalanche upon all of us, unless we are blessed with not only very happy, but very short lives? It is certainly more profound and terrible than we like to pretend. Ask a Unitarian about what is suggested by the word grief, and they are likely to say healing. I've been reading a great deal about grief in recent weeks, and while specialists treat it as something very complex, they have reached very little agreement on how to deal with it. Writers who treat it as a spiritual issue tend to regard grief as a journey towards a restored wholeness. We Unitarians like to think of things as journeys, usually along a path, sometimes through a labyrinth, which is a journey that everyone completes successfully, emerging with a newfound wisdom that turns out to have been inside ourselves all along. My fellow worship associate has even included in the service a poem by Mary Oliver, who finds happy endings in everything. Well, let us hope so. But what of others made of grief? Another contemporary poet, Barbara Crooker, begins her poem by noting that grief is a river you wade in until you get to the other side. However, she then adds, but I am here, stuck in the middle, water parting around my ankles, moving downstream over the flat rocks. I'm not able to lift a foot, move on. Instead, I'm going to stay here in the shallows with my sorrow, nurture it like a cranky baby, rock it in my arms. I don't want it to grow up, go to school, get married. It's mine. Yes, the October sunlight wraps me in a yellow shawl, and the air is sweet as a golden bouquet. On the other side, there are apples, grapes, walnuts, and the rocks are warm from the sun. But I'm going to stand here, growing colder, until every inch of my skin is numb. I can't cross over. Then you will really be gone. Perhaps Mary Crooker needed Mary Oliver to tell her that it's not the weight you carry, but how you carry it. C.S. Lewis, who lost his wife after only a few years of a very happy marriage, famously began his memoir, A Grief Observed, with this sentence: "No one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear." It's a striking observation, for it seems so counterintuitive. After you have lost a loved one, after the worst has happened, what more is there to fear? He is clearly not fearing another family member's death or his own. Lewis does not explain this. He admits that he does not fully understand what is happening. When he begins to describe his ordeal in detail, Lewis notes that in grief, quote, "Nothing stays put. One keeps on emerging from a phase, but it always recurs, round and round. Everything repeats." This is similar to other images that Lewis finds himself feeling. He later describes grief as being the monotonous treadmill march of the mind, and the sense of being a rat in a trap. Although there is motion, it leads nowhere. He is, like other poets, describing a sense of being trapped in immobility. Ralph Waldo Emerson, mourning the death of his son, told a friend that, "I chiefly grieve that I cannot grieve." If grieving is a journey, we cannot begin it. If it is a task, he does not know how to complete it. Edward Hirsch, contemporary poet, who lost a son, an emotionally disturbed young man whom he spent his life worrying about, wrote this: "I did not know the work of mourning is like carrying a bag of cement up a mountain at night. The mountaintop is not in sight because there is no mountaintop. Poor Sisyphus grief. I did not know I would struggle through a ragged underbrush without an upward path because there is no path. There is only a blunt rock with a river to fall into." The grief-stricken sufferer is likened to Sisyphus, who pushes a rock up a slope only to see it roll down again. Once more, we see an explicit denial of the idea that there's a path out of grief, and an insistence that, yes, it is the weight you carry. The great French essayist Michel de Montaigne, who watched 5 of his 6 children die in infancy, meditated long upon grief. He noted the account in Herodotus, how when the Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik III, his army defeated and his city captured, saw a friend among those being led to execution, and he wept. But when he saw his own son suffer the same fate, he stood silent. Montaigne recalls a German captain who, after a battle, found his own son among the dead. The captain simply stood motionless, expressionless, frozen, Montaigne said, without weeping or uttering any sound until he dropped dead upon the ground. Montaigne compared these responses to that of Niobe in Greek mythology, who, after seeing all of her children murdered one by an angry goddess, stood silently weeping until she was turned to stone. Although men and women in the ancient world, riven with wars and disease, knew to expected to see at least some of their children die, we should not assume that they bore it any better than we would. The death of our young, even if grown up enough to be marched off to war, is an enormity that, like a mythological basilisk, we are afraid even to gaze upon. Denise Levertov addressed that creature directly in her poem, Talking to Grief. Ah, grief, I should not treat you like a homeless dog who comes to the back door for a crust, for a meatless bone. I should trust you. I should coax you into the house and give you your own corner, a worn mat to lie on, your own water dish. You think I don't know you've been living under my porch. You long for your real place to be ready before winter comes. You need your name, your collar and tag. You need the right to warn off intruders, to consider my house your own, and me your person, and yourself my own dog. Levertov is, with what degree of irony we cannot quite know, admitting that grief is something she cannot drive away, that she must abide its presence until it is someday, perhaps, tired of her. The idea that time, rather than our own efforts, may bring healing is comforting, but there is no guarantee of this. Edna St. Vincent Millay, in fact, explicitly denies this. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied who told me time would ease me of my pain. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him at the shrieking of the tide. The old snows melt from every mountainside, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. But last year's bitter loving must remain heaped on my heart, and my old thoughts abide. There are 100 places where I fear to go, so with his memory they brim. And entering with relief some quiet place where never fell his foot or shone his face, I say, there is no memory of him here. And so stand stricken, so remembering him. The idea that the passage of time may perhaps bring relief runs counter to the idea, popular these days, that one should not wait for healing. One should set forth on the steps that will take you toward it. This is, I suspect, a very American idea, and perhaps one particularly hospitable to Unitarians, who do not seek God's grace, but tell the bereaved to set about undertaking the work of recovery, which we all seem to assume will ultimately be successful. One problem with this, aside from the fact that it doesn't seem to be true, is that it places upon the mourner the responsibility for passing through their grief and creates the implication that those who cannot do so have somehow failed. We may not wish to do this, but when we make the work of grieving sound forthright, if we heed the pronouncements of those for whom all issues are simple, then that is the inescapable result. So, we find ourselves startled by Anne Sexton's frank admission that, I am tired of being brave. Or by Emily Dickinson, who forthrightly tells us that she measures every grief she meets and wonders if it is as heavy as her own. Dorothy Hollinger, who wrote The Anatomy of Grief, published just a few years ago, writes of a woman whose daughter had died and who found herself, even years later, unable to acknowledge her other daughter's grief, declaring angrily, that was my pain, not yours. It was my little girl who died. Hollinger then goes on to describe how her own mother had reacted similarly when her other daughter had died young. She explains that such a loss is often jealously owned by the parents. The acknowledgement that grief can make us self-centered, can leave us forever comparing our grief to those of others, has an honesty about it that those who offer prescriptions and tidy generalizations perhaps do not. E.M. Forster once said that one death may explain itself, but it throws no light upon another. And I am struck by how hesitant serious clinicians are in making pronouncements about grief. Even poets, who, as I think I've demonstrated, have written so powerfully about individual encounters with grief and mourning, hesitate to make universal declarations. When we like to think today about the deaths of our young people, they are likely to be killed by some armed American civilian than by a foreign soldier. When we think of the diseases that used to kill so many children, reflect on the vaccinations that are now available, however mistrustful some have decided to be. But our young are still killed by guns, and we live in dread that such violence may come close to our own families, as much in 2023 as we did in 1863 or 1943. We cannot draw any wise conclusions from this, merely acknowledge its profoundly sobering truth.
Please join in singing hymn number 97, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child.
Very seldom.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jackie, for leading us. Thank you, Patrick and Bill, and to our tech people in the back. Please join me in the words we use to extinguish the chalice, which you'll find in your order of service or in the chat on the live stream. Together, let us say, we extinguish this flame, not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know.
Thank you.